channel as well. All right, welcome everybody to this MERC Zoom seminar that's focused on uh, strategies, evidence-based strategies related to school dropout prevention. We're really excited to have you here. My name is David Naff. I'm the director of MERC. In case you're not familiar with the Metropolitan Educational Research Consortium, we're a research practice partnership between the School of Education at VCU, and we currently have 5 school division partners in metropolitan Richmond areas. We work with Chesterfield, Goochland, Hanover, Henrico, and Richmond Public Schools. And I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll for people to take to share about what your affiliation is, what your role is, and then a quick question about what your perceptions are about school dropout since the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll give folks a second to answer these questions. Give folks a few more seconds to participate if they'd like. Welcome everybody who's just joining us. And for those who are just joining us, here is some links to some relevant documents to support our seminar today. We're going in our poll and share the results so people can take a look at these. So in terms of affiliation, we have a pretty good spread here. A lot of folks from Chesterfield, Henrico, from BCU, a lot of people from other. And just so you know why we include those 5 school divisions in our affiliation quiz, it's usually just because those are the school divisions that we work with here in metropolitan Richmond through MERC, but really thrilled to have people from outside of the region as well that are able to join us. In terms of your role, it looks like we have some teachers here, some school counselors, school social workers, administrators. It's about a third of the people in the room, some researchers, graduate students, and then others, another big category as well. So there's clearly a lot of different folks here from different perspectives related to school dropout prevention. And then in terms of our perception of school dropout since the COVID-19 pandemic, the majority of people say that it has increased. Some say that it's stayed about the same, and some say that it's decreased. Or you say that I'm not sure, I can't answer this. If you're not sure, you're in the right place because we're going to be going over some data related to this. And honestly, technically, everybody could be correct related to this because it probably depends on where you are. It might be that it's increased. It might be that it's stayed about the same. It might be that it's decreased depending on where you are. I do want to share at the onset that my role is director of MERC. I've helped to oversee this research brief that we're going to be sharing findings from today. But I think more importantly, I'm a former high school counselor, done a lot of work in school dropout prevention, college access, making sure that students graduate on time. So this is a topic that is certainly near and dear to my heart. And we have other folks on this call that have actively worked in schools in counseling roles, administrative roles, teaching roles. And so everybody here that's been working on this in a research capacity also has experience working with students in actual school settings doing this work. So really thrilled to be having this conversation today. And we also recognize that there's a lot of expertise in this room. And so what we're really trying to do is share an overview of what we learned from our research, but then also make sure that we have dedicated time at the end for us to do some collaborative resource sharing and brainstorming related to school dropout prevention. I'm going to share my screen really quick just to kind of give you a quick tour of this resource document that we've linked in the chat, and we'll throw it in there again. But there's links here to the different slides that we're going to be sharing. So in case you wanted to revisit anything we're talking about or share it with your colleagues, please feel free to. We'll have a presentation of our MERC research brief, but also Audra's going to be sharing about the perspective of work that's being done in Chesterfield related to school dropout prevention. You can link to our research brief here and some overviews related to that. The podcast episode that we recorded is also linked here. And then later on, we're going to have some breakout group discussions and then resource sharing that Meleah is going to be going over. And these are links to be able to access all of those different documents that correspond with our breakout discussions. And then our presenter contact information is provided here. We would love it if you get a chance to click on this link down here to quickly share how this research is relevant to your work. MERC is really committed to making sure that we conduct research that has the potential to impact policy and practice, and so we want to know how it's going to be informative to your work. And then finally, if you're interested in anything related to the School of Education or graduate programs, we have some information that's provided on that last page. And then finally, there's a link that we've provided in the chat related to a new hot off the presses report from MERC that focuses on perceptions of advanced coursework enrollment practices. We did a multiple case study in some of our schools related to our advanced coursework access study. And so for those who work in school dropout prevention, this topic is absolutely related to that. So we wanted to make sure that we shared some of this information with you, that this is a resource. There's a lot there related to tracking, standard classes, advanced classes, that sort of thing. So all that's relevant to our conversation today. So we wanted to put that on your radar as well. And without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and share our actual presentation so we can get into actually talking through what we found in the research. Can everybody see my screen? Audra, could you give me a thumbs up? I can see your thumbnail. All right, good deal. So we'll go and hop in and start talking about this. So we're going to be discussing today trends, challenges, and then evidence-based strategies for school dropout prevention in Virginia. The links are provided in the chat, but there's also QR codes here that you can scan that get access to our slides and resources, as well as our research brief. So would encourage you to just take a look at those because we're going to provide an overview today, but there's so much more that you can dig into based off of the research that we've conducted in this area. First of all, just wanted to level set about some definitions that we're building off of here. So whenever we're talking about dropout rates, and this is from the National Center for Education Statistics, but it's also representative of how we talk about dropout rates in Virginia. So there's two different types of school dropout rates that you can cover. There's the status or cohort dropout rate, and that's the percentage of 16 to 24-year-olds not enrolled or without a diploma or equivalent. And then an event graduation rate is the percentage of 16 to 24-year-olds who left school in the previous academic year. So the status or cohort dropout rate is the more comprehensive rates, right? So that's the one that's going to be more inclusive of students that might have dropped out in the previous year that should be in school but wouldn't be captured in that event rate. That's distinctive from on-time graduation. These are related, but they're still distinctive terms. So on-time graduation is students who completed high school within 4 years of enrolling in the 9th grade. This is also a really important metric, obviously tracked at the state level. But today, what we're primarily going to be focusing on whenever we're talking about dropout, we're really referring to the status or cohort dropout rates. And that's primarily what's focused on at the state level as well. So we're trying to be consistent with that. The report that we put together draws from several different sources of information. So there's trend data from the National Center for Education Statistics and the Virginia Department of Education. We also did a literature review of peer-reviewed research that's been published since 2021 primarily. So we really wanted to focus on recently published research. We also included some resources from the National Dropout Prevention Center. So anytime you see NDPC, that's what we're talking about, as well as the What Works Clearinghouse. That's in the Institute for Education Sciences. And one thing that we're going to share at the end as a takeaway is that some of the research that's provided, especially from the National Dropout Prevention Center, is fairly dated. And so we really think it's important that we're summarizing research that's been published more recently since the onset of COVID-19. Thea is going to be talking through a policy analysis of what are the policies at the federal, state, and division level. And whenever we say division, we're really talking about the MERC region. So our 5 school divisions, what are our school board policies and strategic plans? What do they look like related to dropout prevention? And then we'll conclude with some key takeaways and include some recommendations at the end. But first, let's just have a quick conversation about the trend data. And this is related to the poll question that we just asked about, what has school dropout looked like in recent years? So according to the National Center for Education Statistics, in 2021 or 2022, there were 2.1 million US students who dropped out of school. When we look at the median dropout rates in Virginia in the MERC region, and first I want to share, we focused on median dropout rates instead of mean dropout rates because there is so much variability in the dropout rates amongst our 5 school divisions. So you can see the MERC region range here in the middle that, in 2018-19, it ranged from 2.19 up to 24.1%. And so we didn't think it would be particularly accurate to share a mean score. So we're showing median both at our regional level and at the state level. But you can see that there's been a slight increase at the state median since before and after the pandemic. The 2022-2023 data was the most recently available when we worked on this report, whereas the MERC region median is above the state median, but we have shown a slight decrease over that period of time. So just to kind of give you a sense of where the MERC region sits compared to the state median. When we look at this by student demographics and starting with student race, we can see which groups seem to be the most impacted by school dropout when we're looking at pre and post pandemic. And so we can see here when we look at this change column that our Latina OA students tend to have higher dropout rates than white and Asian students, and Black students also tend to have higher dropout rates. We can see that the median in the MERC region for all these different groups is higher than it is at the state level, but we have seen some decreases in recent years in the MERC region, most notably with our Latino OA students, but that's also the group that's had the highest baseline dropout rate in terms of the median. And there's some explanation from the research that we found that's related to this that show that Black and Latino OA students are potentially more likely to be adversely impacted by negative school climate and stereotype threat. There's a variety of reasons that contribute to differences in school dropout prevention that are covered in the brief, but we wanted to share a little bit that helps kind of contextualize this data. Additionally, when we look at this by gender, we can see that male students are more likely to drop out than female students. That's true at the state level, as well as in our MERC region. The numbers, again, tend to be higher in the MERC region in terms of our median. And then we can see with the changes over time here that for the state level, female and male students both showed an increase pre and post pandemic, whereas male students actually showed a decrease pre and post pandemic. And male and female were the only categories that were provided from the Virginia Department of Education. So that's all represented in this data set. We can look at this intersectionally as well, and that's what this table is showing. So when we look at, for Black and Latino O students, when we compare male and female, we can see what the ratios are here. So we can see that our Latino O students are more likely to have higher dropout rates compared to our Black students. But if we look at in terms of the actual ratio of male to female, we can see that Black male students are much more likely to drop out of school than Black female students. Whereas the ratio difference isn't that different for Latina and O students, but male or Latino male students around 20% on average drop out, and this is based on the most recent data. When we look at median dropout rates in Virginia and the MERC region, we look at this by economic disadvantage, students with disabilities, and then multilingual learners. We can see that students who are economically disadvantaged tend to have higher dropout rates than those who are non-economically disadvantaged. It also goes up when you look at students with disabilities. Multilingual learners are the most likely student demographic to have challenges with school dropout. And you can see what this looks like at the state level and in our region. So there's been decreases, fortunately, for multilingual learner students in terms of their school dropout pre and post pandemic. That is particularly true in the MERC region, but it's also because our floor was so much higher initially in 2018-19, where more than a third of students in terms of the median who are multilingual learners dropped out in the 2018-19 school year. So you can get a sense of which student groups need particular support. And there's some additional context from the research related to this. So in terms of economically disadvantaged students from low socioeconomic status backgrounds often experience limited resources, support, and opportunities, and this can lead to school disengagement and school dropout. Students with disabilities, when they drop out of high school, it tends to have particularly adverse impacts on their employment opportunities compared with other students. Audra is going to talk about some of the economic.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your help.
Of school dropout, and that tends to be particularly pronounced for students with disabilities. And then we look at multilingual learners, some context here. Early disparities in MLL learning tend to persist throughout their elementary and secondary education. So providing early support is particularly important for multilingual learners. And then other impacted student groups that we want to make sure that we cover: Native American students or Indigenous students, students who are parents, youth who are justice involved, and then LGBTQ plus students. For Native American students, they tend to be among the most likely to drop out nationally. Those trends were not as pronounced in the state or in the MERC region, but research shows that those tend to be trends that we see nationally. Students who are parents, barely half of students who were mothers received their diploma in the US between 2010 and 2018, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. Youth who are justice involved, Again, this is based off of national data, but around 66% did not return to school after being released from detention in 2016. And that really resonates with my experience as a high school counselor of our students that left for the juvenile justice system. And then sometimes they would return and sometimes they wouldn't. And then LGBTQ plus students, it's estimated that around 1/3 do not earn a diploma. That's from the American Psychological Association. That's dated data back in 2010. It's very difficult to get current data related to LGBTQ students because that's not a demographic group that has data routinely collected in a systematic way at the state level. There are some organizations that collect data related to LGBTQ plus students, but we need to have better data to understand their needs because there's apparent need in this group, and so we want to make sure we have an accurate understanding of their dropout rates. So now we're going to transition to talk about contributing factors, and I'll hand it over to Audra.
Thanks, David. So some of the research showed some contributing factors, and we can get started with some academic challenges. And so when we're looking at what are the areas that would affect or implication or areas or contributing to dropout prevention, it really is looking at middle school academic success will decline in middle school as an early indicator. So even looking at our middle school rates and how are our students faring in middle school as predictors, not necessarily to identify those students, but identify who might need some support. Grade retention is also a big one, and it's consistent with the literature that shows that if a student is being retained along the way in their academic career, they could be at risk for dropping out at some point. And the last one here would be students that are more likely to drop out if they are held back during those transition periods. So from middle school to high school. And that's where we see like supportive programs that are fostering support for students that are at risk in between those areas being really successful in preventing dropout. The next area would be discipline. And I'm sure that you all have looked at your own discipline rates within your districts and your schools have shown that some disciplinary actions taken with students can increase their likelihood of dropping out. We also see that during suspensions creating disengagement and other opportunities for students to be disconnected from the school environment, which we know will impact their school engagement and success. And then we also see in the literature that there are disproportionality rates within suspensions related to Black students and how that contributes to our dropout rates within our schools. The next one would be absenteeism. So if our students are not coming to school, they are not going to be as successful in school, and that would contribute there. Some chronic absenteeism is strongly associated with the performance related to academics, grade retention, and also risk of dropping out within high school. And we see that across the span, as well as things like unexcused absences. We call that truancy here in the state of Virginia. That particularly is a predictive indicator for students that might need some intervention and interactions to support them moving forward. Peer influence. So we don't always think about this one, but students that feel more connected to one another are less likely to drop out. And so these tend to be a predictive quality. If there is some connection to peers and how well peers are doing, then we tend to see an increase within this area as well. Peer attendance and acceptance are protective factors, and we talk about resilience and the connection between school community, school climate, and the interactions between students. That can also help protect students as we think about dropout prevention. We also think about pockets of students like Native students or immigrant students. That particular connection is very helpful in supporting students there. And the last one here would be social contagion theory. And so this is something that came up in our research that if I have a friend that has dropped out, I'm more likely to drop out in my career in academics. And so how can we connect to different social groups that might be at higher risk so that we can prevent this moving forward? So that was something that was interesting in the literature. Moving on there, we did talk and see a lot about ninth grade transition. You see this in like ninth grade academies and other sorts of initiatives happening in schools related to supporting that transition from moving from middle school to high school. The pass rate, if students can pass all of their classes in ninth grade, they are more likely to meet graduation on time. And so that ninth grade success year is super important. And we found that in the research as well. And then those that are promoted in ninth grade are more likely to move forward. So it says 1/3 of students who drop out of high school are not promoted in ninth grade. And so those were pretty key indicators really early on. I know that sometimes we look at dropout rates and prevention and we're thinking 11th grade, 12th grade, and have they crossed the finish line? But really this happens much earlier. And so it's something to definitely look at, and our research supports that as well. And also literacy skills. And they're so important. I know we talk about literacy all the time and how that's impactful, but students that have that strong preparedness for high school are more likely to do well in the coursework, and also bridge those challenges related to exams. Our research also talked about some demographic compositions that I'd like to share with you all as well. And so looking at students who are economically disadvantaged or racial groups and ethnic groups, we have found in the research that they have higher rates of dropout. And this one I say with some level of caution that these are not causal. There are certainly some systemic connections and different influences within those that we will point out a little bit later, but just wanted to bring out that those are particular pockets of students that are more at risk for dropout. Go ahead to the next one for me. So we see within the MERC region, especially our Black and Latino and Latine students, are economically disadvantaged students, students with disabilities, and multilingual learners all have significant predictors for dropout rates. And so when we're looking at how do we help students, we really need to think about these students specifically within these demographic groups and to support them. There's some more information about our multilingual learners having an increased dropout rate, and students with disabilities also percentage of increased dropout rates there too. So where does this leave us as far as implications and consequences? We know that these have some long-term consequences as a community as a whole. So I wanted to touch base on those pieces there. There are some economic implications that our research showed, essentially that there's a large difference between some racial groups, particularly our Black students, and the difference between their high school attainment and their diploma and not receiving their diploma. And so you'll see there that our Black students have a higher difference within there at 3.2%. And then we also see that there's not a huge difference between our Latine students as well, between their attainment and how the employment rates moving forward and how that's impacting. So I thought that was particularly interesting in our research and wanted to point that out. We have another point of engagement I wanted to show you as well. So earning a high school diploma reduces the rate or risk of poverty moving forward. And so we see that across the US, across Virginia, and as well as in MERC region. And so that's a high implication for how do our students that are achieving diplomas, how are they returning to our community, and what would that look like for poverty rates for us? And so that has very large implications for not just our school systems, but our communities at large, our resources, and how we are using those resources to support folks that we can make a big impact within the school system to change. And lastly, I wanted to make sure that we also talked about the social and emotional implications. We also know that there is a connection between dropout rates and increased risk of substance abuse, depression, mental health concerns, conduct behaviors, and how that's a strain on different social relationships and criminal behavior. So it's not just about our economic impact. There are a number of other resources that are connected to and could dropout prevention could definitely affect those within our community as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Meleah Ellison. I'm a Research and Evaluation Associate with MERC and ICRE at VCU. Prior to this role, I led a statewide philanthropic college access program. And before that, I was an educator, both as a classroom teacher, a school counselor, and a district level trainer in one of the largest urban school districts in the country. And so, similar to everyone here, I certainly know the importance of making sure that all of our kids are graduating on time. And so I'm excited to share with you because we have at this point, I think, documented the problem quite well. So I'm excited to share with you some evidence-based strategies. And as I'm sharing these, many of the strategies we mentioned have a positive impact on all students, both those who are succeeding in a PK-12 setting and those who are experiencing challenges. For the context of this conversation, we're going to focus on specific evidence-based strategies that increase the occurrence of school completion, but certainly your mind will be thinking of how this will benefit other student groups as well. To begin, relationship building and belonging. While certainly a robust network of supportive relationships can be impactful, data indicates that the quality of relationships between students and adults in schools is connected with increased graduation rates. And further information on the slide shows that these can be achieved through inclusive practices that let students know school is a place they belong. And it can be done in a variety of ways, including mentoring programs, which the National Dropout Prevention Center has highlighted as a key strategy. Certainly building a positive school climate and culture is critical. Similar to relationship building and belonging, efforts to create a positive school climate where students feel encouraged, supported, and safe to learn is vital in increasing school completion rates and decreasing school dropout rates. Examples of effective school-wide programs include PBIS, GSAs, Reconnect Youth, Check and Connect, and Prepare. And these programs, as well as others, and as well as other efforts to create a positive school climate and culture. All faculty and staff play a critical role, but efforts are most impactful when administrators lead the way in establishing norms, practices, and protocols that support the success of all students. Moving on to social, emotional, and behavioral support. For students struggling with significant mental health needs, including depression, early detection and intervention are key. School counselors play a pivotal role in our schools, both in the general social, emotional, and behavioral support they provide, but also in terms of the roles they play in regards to dropout monitoring and prevention. And attendance-based interventions, which can involve a variety of school staff, including administrators, nurses, school counselors, school social workers, and teachers, are also extremely important to ensure that students are routinely in school and have access to the curriculum, as well as any additional supports or interventions they may need to help them be successful. Looking at academic and curricular approaches. Students are more likely to be engaged in their learning when they see their cultural experiences and identities represented in the curriculum. We also know that students are more likely to be engaged with course content when the instruction is sufficiently rigorous in a way that both challenges and supports them in a scaffolded manner. Work-based learning is one example of a valuable opportunity to help students engage in both the academic content that they're learning and connecting it with their future goals. And when students struggle, the National Dropout Prevention Center recommends they be offered alternative education and credit recovery options. Students benefit when schools have trusting relationships with families, and this includes concerted efforts to have those partnerships all the way from elementary to high school. And so that includes laying the groundwork in elementary school to set the tone for collaboration throughout the student's PK-12 pathway. It's important that information be accessible to all families, and that includes making materials and information available to families whose native language may not be English. Again, just any way that you can engage families and make it a place where they feel welcome and celebrated in schools has a positive impact on students. Extracurricular involvement also serves as extremely valuable in helping students complete their complete high school and receive their diploma. Through extracurricular activities, students can form meaningful connections with others and self-confidence, both of which we know support high school completion. Extracurricular activities can take place after school or outside of the school day, both within the school setting or with outside community-based organizations. And again, these are strategies that are endorsed and supported by research and leaders in the field. In regards to support for multilingual learners, multilingual students are best supported when they have robust and high quality language support programs to assist in acclimating to the English language. As mentioned previously, parents play a critical role in the success of our students, so it's vital that schools make efforts to make information accessible with them and partner with them. Not only do we want students, all of our students to feel welcome in our schools, we want our families to do well as well, and that certainly includes families of multilingual learners. An ongoing professional development for faculty and staff is critical for helping educators better understand the cultural background and the needs and strengths of multilingual students and their families. And now for another student group who we've discussed, and that's support for students with disabilities. It's important to note that there is a correlation between the percentage of students with disabilities in a school and the rates of school completion. While support is important, overly restrictive placements can limit the likelihood of on-time graduation for students in this group. And as mentioned previously, all students benefit from an inclusive school environment, and this is often a key factor in the success of students with disabilities.
Hi, so my name is Thea. And a lot of my research is on policies and their impacts on stakeholders across the board. So this is my jam. Let's talk about some of the relevant policies that we were able to identify as having a particular impact on dropout prevention. So at first glance, these should not seem all that unusual to you. You're probably familiar with a lot of these policies, and that's a good thing. So Title I funding is funding for LEAs, local education agencies, who serve significant numbers of low-income students. Those are students who tend to have higher rates of dropout. And so this is very familiar to us by now. We all know about Title I schools, direct impact on dropout prevention by offering extra supports for schools that might have extra risk factors. Next, we have the Every Student Succeeds Act that emphasized that states should establish or improve school dropout and reentry programs, right? That and reentry is also really important. It's not like you dropped out. Ah, well, I guess too bad, so sad, right? But really also having programs and policies in place that support reentry in concerted ways is super important, as well as identifying that evidence-based strategies for promoting on-time graduation are very important as well. The McKinney-Vento policy might sound familiar to you as well, because it provides grants to increase the enrollment, the attendance, and the success of youth experiencing homelessness, as well as providing kind of some nuanced ways to understand what homelessness looks like for students who are attending schools and what the risk factors might be. Head Start is here too, and you're wondering, what does Head Start have to do with dropout prevention? That's a long way away. And yet the research shows, and our research holds this up as well, that the Head Start program offers preschool that is high quality, right? And is research-based for low-income children and families. And I can proudly say that I worked as a family advocate for Head Start for a number of years. So we know that the impacts of Head Start are kind of long-term and continue to build positive relationships and help with those resources that students will need later on. Next. is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 1975 that ensures that students with disabilities receive a free, appropriate public education. You might see that as FAPE, right? Super important. That includes the accommodations that students might need to support academic success. So recognizing that we are going to need kind of different supports, different services, and different strategies, especially for students with disabilities to be able to reach their goals academically. Super important in dropout prevention as well. The Higher Education Act of 1965 includes provisions for providing college access, especially for low-income and first-gen students. First-generation students are students whose parents have not completed a college degree. It's defined differently in different places, but generally that's what it means. And it supports their high school graduation. So creating that college-bound pipeline is part of what the Higher Education Act provides for, especially for students who might not have as much access to that college-going culture in their homes. The Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Improvement Act has a long name, but it's a great policy because just like we just looked at creating that college-bound pipeline, technical education is also super important. Vocational education, which research suggests can help facilitate school completion, especially for those students who are, have skills that lie otherwise and decide that college isn't for them. That doesn't mean that there's not post-secondary opportunities for them. It doesn't mean that graduation is not an important goal for them. And this is kind of reinforcing that idea of there's more for you. And of course, Title IX, which prohibits sex-based discrimination in public institutions. As we were looking through all the trends and contributing factors, we see that there's difference based on the sex of students. So this is a policy that prohibits sex-based discrimination in public institutions. And that means that any policies or practices that disproportionately impact on-time graduation for students based solely on their sex could be subject to enforcement by the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education. So important to be monitoring those trends and ensuring that our practices are not creating that disproportionate impact for boys versus girls or vice versa. And let's bring it a little bit closer to home. We're going to talk about state policy next and see what's happening here. So we have at-risk student academic achievement program and fund. This is a cool resource because it's a non-competitive grant that can be offered to local education agencies to implement research-based programs for supporting academic achievement, reducing the rate of dropouts for at-risk students. So it's kind of targeted, non-competitive. It's not meant to replace existing programs, but to supplement them, which is absolutely needed, right? The more resources, the better. We have the college and career readiness, career exposure, exploration, and planning, and opportunities for post-secondary policy, because it guides academic and career plans for all students starting in elementary, starting when they still think they want to be like a dinosaur farmer, and they identify those strengths and they track what is it that they're really into, what are they interested in learning more about, and continue to track that, knowing that along the way we get to know the student and can find out when there's glitches in the matrix, when they need a little extra support on their way to becoming the best dinosaur farmer that they can be. Early warning systems. This is tremendously important. It's been stated already. I'll state it again. Students don't just wake up one day and decide, this school stuff is not for me, right? So this is the Virginia Department of Education provides this early warning system that tracks attendance, academic performance, and behavior, right? This cluster of factors that all feed into dropout, right? And kind of anticipate that so that we can enable timely interventions that happen before the student reaches that point. We start seeing the patterns, early warning system is triggered, and students can get support before they get to the point of dropout. and when they're actually really vulnerable and needing that support and encouragement. Alternative education is a state policy supported by the Virginia Department of Education that's focused on providing support to students who have violated school board policies and or received a long-term suspension or expulsion that would prohibit them from completing the coursework required for graduation. So recognizing that just because a student has had these struggles or has had these issues in their career does not mean that we shouldn't still offer them support to complete their coursework and graduate, right? So finding those pathways and those supports for those students is also critically important. And of course, the role of counselors, we cannot sing their praises enough. These counselor roles are outlined by the Virginia Department of Education and include a focus on providing academic supports that help students successfully complete high school. So singing praise for counselors as well as advocating for lower caseloads. And then looking more specifically locally, we can talk about some strategic plans as well as some school board policies. Dropout prevention teams consist of various positions that are tailored to each division's needs. We know as educators and people invested in education in a variety of roles that teamwork makes the dream work. So a team approach to dropout prevention is always going to support students. Student re-engagement managers, a super important role, as I mentioned before, right? That student who's able to get them back into the system to re-engage, having people who will whose role it is to support them as they re-engage to successfully complete their graduation. And of course, course flexibility, alternative education, credit recovery, finding ways to work with students and their circumstances to ensure that they're able to graduate and achieve their goals. Promoting the use of restorative practices, particularly, right, looking at how we're doing discipline. Out of school suspension is not the only alternative in our universe for dealing with disciplinary issues. Restorative practices can do some of that work of building a sense of belonging, a sense of community, as well as accountability that can serve students well. Strategic plans, holistic approaches to education, right? Comprehensive social, emotional, and academic support. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, right? We know that holistic approaches, team approaches, we are whole human beings. So are our students. So we want to ensure that we are taking that holistic approach. Engagement and attendance initiatives, particularly chronic absenteeism reduction. And this is something that has particularly kind of been on the radar since COVID, right? That's been kind of a trend that folks have been monitoring. And career and technical education, again, as well as career skill preparedness, super important. Equity and student advocacy, including promoting student voice. This was named, but it's worth repeating, right? So it's not that students' identities are causing all these issues, right? LGBTQ students have a ton of assets and strengths. It's not being LGBTQ that is causing the problems. It is some systemic issues, right, that are causing extra challenges for those of us of different identities or different racial backgrounds, or depending on our sex and gender presentation. So promoting equity as well as empowering students to advocate for themselves can be a real form of empowerment and keep people engaged and connected to learning and to the system. And so some of our key takeaways and recommendations. We have 5 points to share with you as our takeaways. Number 1, early detection and intervention are so key in dropout prevention. Especially, we mentioned that like 9th grade pain point, considering how prominent it is for students who dropped out of high school to be retained in middle school or never be promoted past the 9th grade. Providing additional resources and interventions at these transition points seems to be a particularly kind of critical pain point for students. Number two, taking an eclectic approach that's mindful of the role of different stakeholders in dropout prevention. So recognizing that that team approach that we were talking about, that holistic engagement, educators, families, peers, communities, everyone is going to feel the impact of dropout in different ways, and everyone can kind of pitch in to minimize the risk of dropout as well. Thirdly, we want to make sure that we're supporting the unique needs and identities of students particularly susceptible to dropout, which includes Black and Latina, Indigenous, low socioeconomic status, students who are experiencing homelessness, students who have a disability, students who are multilingual learners. We want to make sure we're building an inclusive environment for all students because it is critically important for dropout prevention. Número cuatro, there is a need for more updated research, right? We need more updated research from National Dropout Prevention Resources. A lot of the National Dropout Prevention Center comes from the 1990s and the 2000s, and the 2000s don't sound that long ago if you're my age, but they are. So they need to include more recent research, that has been published since the onset of COVID, because we know the stressors have changed. We know some of the trends are changing, and we need more recent research and data. And finally, resources should be allocated strategically to schools and communities most impacted by dropout. This includes high poverty and racially segregated schools, as well as schools with higher percentages of students with disabilities and multilingual learners.
Thank you, Thea. So that's just an overview of what we learned in this research brief. There is so much more to unpack. We call it a research brief, but it's 20-something pages because there's so much information that's related to school dropout that we thought was important to share. So just encourage you to take a look at that research brief, take a look at the slides and resources that we've shared today, share this within your networks for anybody who you know is doing this research. We're going to transition here in just a minute to Audra to share what this looks like at the division level in Chesterfield. But before we do that, it looks like Ashley has a question related to family and caregiver engagement. So Ashley, do you want to unmute and ask your question really quick?
Really appreciate it, folks. Hi, I'm at the high schools within Richmond Public Schools. We have a strong, beautiful population of Black and Latino students. And one thing that really surprised me within the work of graduation and dropout prevention, being more familiar with our immigrant families and I guess those particular needs, as that's my personal background, I was very surprised to hear of families and older students celebrating dropping out because their parents or their grandparents, who were also RPS students at one point, were dropouts and were able to obtain a job of some sort. And that is very different from what I'm accustomed to hearing of dropping out for survival reasonings. I have to take care of other family members. I have to work. So I was curious if folks have encountered that particular dynamic where there are generations within a family, within the school district, and thinking about rebuilding trust. Because that's something that we're seeing at the high schools where we can build trust with some of our new families. But how do we re-engage families of, Ashley, where their parents were RPS dropouts and their grandparents were also RPS dropouts? Yeah.
Yeah, I see you nodding along.
Can I jump in? Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to jump in here because I'm Latina, and one of the roles that I have, I worked as a school and community partnerships director in LA. And we ran into exactly the dynamic that you named, right? Like that kind of generational celebration of like we do our own thing. And it's almost became, for some families, it almost became like a rite of passage to drop out. And so I think some of the work that we were doing in the community was around exactly what you named, was like rebuilding trust. And I think that was one of those places where engagement with peers was super important, like seeing different ways of doing it, bringing in other Latino community members to speak about their stories and their success. Having graduated high school, having gone on to college, having gone on to vocational careers, whatever it was, right? But really kind of saturating with positive messages, as well as building relationships with families that were super like non-judgmental and just trying to understand where people were coming from. But I totally hear you. It's a super hard dynamic. And I think that's, relationship building as well as taking approaches that find the strengths, right? These families have incredible strengths. How can we leverage those strengths for staying in school instead of having a party and a carne asada when we drop out? That's not really an answer, like a solution answer, but more of an affirmation of like, I feel you. That is such a hard dynamic. And it takes a lot of work, right? It took a lot of work to erode that trust with families, and it's generational. So now I think being patient and staying the course is what starts to pay off as we see more and more Latino students coming back to tell their peers, look, I was successful, it worked for me, and kind of leveraging that.
I appreciate that so much. Thank you. And we'll probably be asking you questions after these meetings, because that's just really fascinating, especially coming from a place like LA, where you have both generations of strong Black families, generations of strong Latino and Native families, and then you have new families that are just migrating either from other parts of the country or other parts of the world. So I will definitely be picking on your brain. Thank you.
Right. So the email is provided in the resource document for this exact reason. Thank you for raising that question, Ashley. And we're going to throw it to Audra here in just a second. I do want to highlight that whenever Meleah introduces our ending topic, it's totally related to what Thea was just sharing for each of these different student groups that we're talking about through the beginning conversation about what are the strengths of this group before talking about potential interventions and support. So with that, I'll throw it over to Audra.
Thank you. Can you hear me, David? Are we good? Perfect. Thank you. I didn't get a chance to really introduce myself. My name is Audra Lancaster. I am the coordinator for school counseling and mental health services for Chesterfield County. I'm wearing many hats tonight. I'm also part of the MERC research team, and I am a doctoral student at VCU. And I have had the pleasure of being a school counselor by trade for over 15 years. I've had a chance to work in Virginia. I started my career there. I've worked in higher education as well. I trekked across the country and also worked in LA and Burbank area as a school counselor and in higher education. And so I'm bringing a profound sense of how this whole trajectory connects with one another. And I just wanted to share a little bit about Chesterfield and some of the things that we're doing outside of the things that we've already learned related to state, local, and federal policies in some of those spaces there. I wanted to talk about our strategies related to 3 different areas, and that would be prevention, early detection, and then our response and re-engagement. And so let's first talk about prevention. And I first want to also acknowledge this is not all inclusive. These are just some general ideas that we put into practice here at Chesterfield. One would be related to attendance initiatives and early action. And so we're really taking a look at, those early moments where we're looking at attendance. How can we build in whole school cultures of attendance and building in that positive connection between when I go to school, I feel connected. When I feel connected, I feel like I want to do well and want to stay there and invest in my success. So you'll see that across our division. And then early action, when we do see some slips in attendance or disconnections there, how can we re-engage families? And we'll talk a little bit about that. One of our participants here, our guest also mentioned early childhood, and we see those huge connections between early childhood success, identifying and connecting with students that and building those really strong relationships early on are more likely to help indicate that they're going to do well and be successful moving forward, and building in those strong strengths related to and skills related to school going culture, school success, and what that can look like. So we have robust programs within each of our schools, and then also different centers for early childhood education. Across our division, we build in positive behavioral interventions, different programs like PBIS, which I am sure you are all familiar with, but then also other culture building programs related to school counseling, mental health, and building in that whole school culture of inclusivity and belonging. What does social networking look like, and how do we leverage those things so that we're building those connections, not just between student and faculty, but student to student, and building those bridges in between those. So you'll see those throughout. We have district-wide programs related to social emotional learning. We know our research shows that there is a high connection to how are we engaging with others, how do we treat each other with inclusion, respect, belonging, how do we, have anti-bullying programs and different things like that support school culture, and a strong school culture that supports students to be successful, not just in the classroom, but overall. And so that holistic approach again. We see at each of our transition points, so between 5th grade and 6th grade, which is our transition point, and then again in 8th to 9th, that we have transition programs that support students so that they can make that transition easier, that we are engaging our families when those transitions come, so that they are a partner every step of the way through their educational career. And so that's something that's just built upon every year. And then we really try to focus on targeted and specific staff training to help understand their roles in each of these, that we're not just here to convey curriculum, we're here to engage students, engage families. How do I lockstep that approach between what I deliver in the classroom is also something that a parent is also engaged with as well. So those are some of the areas is related to prevention. What we try to do is really have these very integrated models that are interdisciplinary, and you'll see that a lot in our early detection spaces. So when we think about early detection, we try to use early evidence-based strategies for whole school, whole team approaches to remove some of those barriers for students. I also have a social emotional lens, a school counseling lens, so a lot of what you'll hear me say is related to those spaces. We do also engage students with curriculum that is not only rigorous, but also relevant and draws connections to their outside world. So one of the questions was brought up of like, how do we connect when maybe the value set isn't, our quote unquote traditional value set of school? How do we engage students that it is in a relevant way, that they can see themselves building skills that they can apply to their larger community and to their life personally? And so those are some things that we try to focus on so that they're getting that in their classroom, and that connects to the things that they also believe in. They are students as well. Going back to identifying students, we have attendance initiatives and early actions that are in place. We do climate surveys and different pulse checks along the way that our school leadership teams bring back together to reflect on our practices. We know that when the school year gets rolling, we're doing the things and we're checking the boxes and making sure that we are meeting all of our state policies and different things like that, but really having building in some time for reflection. What students are we engaging? Who are we not? What voices are missing at those tables? Bringing those into student study teams so that we're looking at a child in a holistic way and looking at different trends at the school level in a few different spaces to help support those students. Of course, we are engaging in those multi-tiered systems of support and implementation. So what is everyone getting as far as a service? How do we identify students that need additional support? How do we engage those there? And then our higher need students, what are the direct services that we are engaging to help our students be successful? One of the things that we like to do specifically in Chesterfield is related to reentry, and I mean that across the board. So behavioral reentry. So if a student is suspended, what is the behavioral response plan? How do we re-engage at students once they've been suspended so that we can set them up for success to not only deter those repeated behaviors, but then how do we build skills so that that we can be successful in school? That happens on our mental health response spaces. So if we're done a threat assessment, a child's been hospitalized, how do we re-engage the family there to support students? Also, when students are coming from alternative spaces, whether that be through behavioral or academic spaces, re-engaging them into comprehensive school settings or creating plans around those students so that they're successful there. We do safety planning through crisis and different things like that. One of the practices that we also like to employ are those referral services. So when we're in our study team meetings, when we're in a re-engagement space, that we're also saying what other resources can we bring into place? Who can we connect these students and families with to build their network so that they have an arsenal of folks around them? It's just like this covering that we try to do in each of those areas and each of those practices. And then also referral to different programmings and things like that. I can't say enough how hard our special population teams work. So our multi-language learner teams and our ESL and engagement and family engagement, they work extremely hard. Our special education teams as well to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our populations that we said in this research as well that are so important and are impacted through this area. The last space is our response and re-engagement. And so we know along this path, there will be hiccups, there will be hangups. And so how do we keep students, re-engage students, connect with them, respond to their needs, looking at chronic absenteeism. And we really do an all hands approach to this. And so there are different tiers along the way. What are our teachers doing related to absenteeism, whether that be calling, setting appointments, and just connecting with families and home. How are our school counselors pushing in and supporting them, our school sites, our school social workers, our office staff, and our administrators all play a role. How are we using our students and leveraging them for ambassador work? That's another thing that you'll see in our schools as well. This year we have attended interventionist specialists that we've been able to employ, and this team kind of works in feeder patterns with some higher level needs as far as attendance to make sure that we're having some whole family approaches. Some of the other things, and these are just examples of our community partnerships that we engage communities and schools. I'm sure they sound familiar to you all. TDT, our therapeutic day treatment, some other programs like Boys to Men, Girls to Women, Mega Mentors, which is a mentorship program where we use community partners that are then able to connect and build relationships within the schools, bringing in that mentorship component, being able to see what's out there and how my journey can connect to some professionals in our community and my neighborhood. So that's a pretty neat one. We have family engagement teams and liaison teams that work. And one of the cool things that I am discovering that we're doing now is embedding, and it's something that I try to do in my work as well, is embed some of these engagement opportunities within spaces we already are practicing. For example, college and career fair is happening right now. Typically, you think there are colleges and career reps that are happening as well. How about also engaging some community resources into that space where we're already bringing families into play? One of our high schools decided that, hey, I'm really not getting a great turnout when I have my resource information meetings for families during dinner time, and I'm sending food and I'm doing all the things. And this school team decided that they wanted to embed that into, they got a good turnout for basketball games. So during halftime, they're going to have resource information available and presented to families during that time. So it's just rethinking some of the things that we're already doing and connecting with folks in that space. And so I thought those were really neat ways that I wanted to share with you all today. Lastly, there's a lot of work around our on-time graduation and cohort monitoring. So in Chesterfield, we don't just look at our 12th grade students, we look at cohorts from the start to the finish. So we're looking at multiple grade levels and multiple progressions to make sure that we are managing our students towards dropout prevention. And also one thing that counselors do specifically is that responsive scheduling, that we're building out those academic career plans, that if there are hurdles along the way, that we're planning and working with students and families to make sure there are alternative scheduling options for them, that personalized transcription when we have like immigrant families and different things like that, that we're really trying to track our academic careers for students and continually revisiting that academic career plan starting in middle school. And we do that all the way through graduation. Last thing is just, this work can't be done without staff who is ready and on board with it. So trying to work on staffing models that help engage students, building in those collaboration settings, those consultation settings, and really working on a team approach for those implementations. So those are the few nuggets that I had from Chesterfield. I can't wait for us to kind of dig into some more conversation.
Thank you, Audra. Speaking of those conversations, as we share this information, we honor all of you as partners with expertise. And so this next little block of time is an opportunity for us to work in breakout groups and everyone share their expertise. And so I am going to share my screen. And just so you know, what I am referring to is the resource document that David and Thea have shared. Can y'all see my screen? I feel like that's a rite of passage of a Zoom call. Like, am I muted? Can you see my screen? Can you hear me? On this document at the top of page 2, so if you're following along on your own, it's at the top of page 2. You will see links here, and these go to forms where groups can work together to discuss particular groups of students who are significantly impacted by high school incompletion. And so as an example, I'm going to refer to the first one, which was for students experiencing economic hardships. If this is a group you're interested in, you could opt into this group. I also want to say there's not much time to bounce around to different groups, but so I ask that you start with one and that you pick it, and if there's time, move around. But the great thing is that all of these documents are accessible to everyone. So the hope is that the groups who are working on specific student groups will add to the document. It will become a living, breathing document, and then it will be shared with everyone after the fact so that we can share information. So as an example for students experiencing hardships, I really want us to orient our conversations first about strengths, the highlight of the student groups. As we've mentioned throughout, their identities are not deficits and they come with strengths, and those strengths are often connected to how we can best support them. So just as a team, brainstorm some strengths of the group to highlight and emphasize, some factors that are impacting school completion. Some of those you may have heard discussed today, and some may be from your own experience. So barriers that they may be facing, or just various other factors that are impacting their school completion. And then on the right side of the bottom column, we welcome you then to list some resources, strategies, or individuals to provide support in addressing that factor that's impacting school completion. So for example, if you're doing economic hardship, maybe your factor is housing instability. So then on the right, you might want to put some resources, some strategies, or some individuals that can help support in alleviating or eliminating that barrier. Maybe it's individuals who work in the school, maybe it's individuals in the community, maybe it's specific evidence-based strategies, or just resources that you're aware of. And then finally, we will come back together when we have just a few minutes left to close out. David, do you want to explain how they're going to choose breakout rooms?
Yep, I'll open the rooms here in just a second. You should be able to opt into any room that's of interest to you. Like Meleah said, you can bounce around, but maybe just hop into the one that's particularly of interest to you. And then for anybody who's watching this recording later, I'm going to stop the recording now, but you're going to be able to access these resource documents. So you can continue to learn from the resources that are shared during the session. So I'm going to open these up now, and we'll come together very briefly at the end just to touch base about next steps. So rooms are now open. You should be able to join whichever one you are interested in.